I'm Mark Seifton.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, friends.
Hi, welcome to Arcane Mark.
Welcome to Arcane Mark. Today we're here to talk about curating content. And we don't mean like content creators' videos content, because the term content is actually something that gets very confusing with the idea of content creators being video makers. When I first heard the term many years ago, I was like, oh, so like that's the third-party publishers who create content, because we're talking about content creators who like help promote a game, and it's like, no, it's actually not. So we mean curating the game content for your game.
And how you're going to curate it is really going to depend upon your reason for curating. So
that's correct.
But curate our advice, let's organize it into
there's some
categories.
Overall principles that you're going to want to keep into effect no matter what. So first, I'm going to discuss like what is curating your game. Like, what is this? Like, I'm using a verb that's usually used for like museum curators. What is it, and why might? We'll talk about different reasons you might want to do it, but we'll first talk about what is it and what are like the two-dimensional graph that we're going to use all throughout the rest of this show about like the effort of the curation versus the effect of the benefits of the curation, because different decisions are going to take you to very different places on that graph. And unfortunately, most people are too busy to do anything that goes very far on the effort side. But unfortunately, putting in more effort is almost always way better for curation. So we're going to try to give you some secret tips and tricks so that you could avoid having to put in as much effort as you otherwise would. Because most of the time, lazy curation techniques are hard to use unless the system itself is on your side. Fortunately, Pathfinder 2 is on your side, unlike most other D&D-like tabletop RPGs, and has some built-in ways to make curation simpler.
So to talk about what curation is, it's deciding which different mechanics and themes and ideas you want to have in your game. It could be, it might be like, I want to include this class, but not this class. It might be like, I want to include content, but I don't want to include content that has like heavy horror themes in it.
Yep. It might be like there's too much gun violence, so let's not put in guns. It could be my group loves sci-fi being mixed in, because we played Expedition in the Barrier Peaks every Monday for the last 30 years, and now we want to have as much of that as possible in the game.
So we're going to find this other source, and we're going to bring it in, and we're going to make it more prevalent.
So curating isn't only about cutting back. Sometimes it is about intentionally adding something in, like a museum curator who comes to find other collections and decides what to bring in. You're not only about removing to curate your game. So the idea of curating is very intentionally deciding what to include or not to include in your game for a specific purpose, like a bonsai tree caretaker pruning certain branches to help it grow in a certain way.
And the rarity in Pathfinder also gets to the fact that it isn't always like a complete 100% yes all the time or a no never. It may be that something is, around but less prevalent, or around and usually not very common, but it's actually more prevalent, and that can make a significant difference as well.
That's right. So that's because of the fact that just like the 4 degrees of success in Pathfinder, your answer to a question or a conversation that started about curation with your players does not have to be yes. Sure, yes in all ways. It does not have to be no unqualified, but it could be yes but, or no but.
Yeah. And you'll often see that if it's like, for example, if you're curating content for, theme and appropriateness to the story, it may be the case that a player comes to you and they say, hey, I want to play this ancestry. And then you're like, okay, well, that ancestry, or I want to play someone who is from like this part of the world that's very distant, or has this particular aspect to their story. And like, maybe that's not quite as congruous with like the main group of what you were thinking, but then you come up with a way for that to work together. So you're not going to say, so like, somebody's playing a gunsmith, and it's like, okay, well, then maybe they're from Alkenstar, and you find a way to tie that in by bringing other factors into it.
Yes, this is an overall principle that will apply in all of the situations. Here's
Mhm.
a real world example of this. Someone wanted to play a sylph who was in a town that was small and so weird about people with versatile heritage. This was in Pathfinder First, where it wasn't
Mhm.
called that. But so weird about it that they drove an Asabar into like an evil aligned church because of how they singled her out and put
Mhm.
her on a pedestal for it. And so it was like, this is probably pretty unlikely that they have a lot of sylphs. But I was
Mhm.
like, tell you what though, how about your father was a wizard who was like researching the North Pole and he got lost there at some point, and you've been in this city for a while because he never came back. And she was like, okay, yeah, that works for me. And so I was able to tie into like an NPC who had died in the backstory of like deep in the backstory of one of the other parts of the adventure path, and then
Mhm.
got her really interested when we got to that part of the adventure path also. And then we also had an explanation. It's like she didn't have to grow up there because she moved traveled with her father until he went to there. So that's how we can square the circle with the
Mhm.
treatment, because she wasn't necessarily, I was well, you could be from here and you had this weird, horrible treatment like this other person, but she
Mhm.
wasn't really that excited about that either. And we both liked the idea of her father being like this traveling self wizard, especially since she was like a druid who wanted to then learn some wizard things like her father and became a mystic thurge back in
Mhm.
first edition.
Another general principle to keep in mind with the curation is for content that this isn't going to be true for every element because there's not complete symmetry between PCs and NPCs. But in general, if something is a potential for the PCs to do, it's probably a potential for the NPCs to do, and vice versa. So, like, if the PCs could possibly cast a spell, it's possible that NPCs could cast that spell. If NPCs would have access to that spell, the PCs might be able to get access to that spell too. So if you're looking at something and you're saying, I want to add this for my monster or my opponent, think about what that's going to look like in your PC's hands. So, for example, one of the biggest mistakes I made as a GM for the purpose of power balance is I was looking at a boss in Kingmaker, and I was thinking, hey, I really want to do this cool thing with like quicken spells and things like that. But in order to pull off what I want to do for this encounter, I'm going to need 2 staves of the master. So I gave this enemy 2 staves of the master, but then for the rest of the campaign, I had to deal with the fact that the PCs then had the ability to pull that kind of shenanigans. So that was a lesson learned there. That like if you want that whatever you put into the NPC's hands or the PC's hands, like you got to think about it going in
Yeah,
the other
sure.
direction.
And in the other way
And so
around,
and so and so like had I like if I hindsight is 2020, but if I had gone back and remade the decision, I would have decided that item is not something that I want.
in the other way
This is for
around,
your brother.
in the first 3.5 game that Linda played in, which I was
Mhm.
running, there was a player who wanted a spell that was very obviously busted. It
Mhm.
just was. And some of us thought it was busted. And I was the GM, but he just would not stop trying to get it added to his character. And eventually I was like, fine, but I'm going to use it at some point with NPCs, and
Mhm.
I'll probably TPK you
Mhm.
because the spell is really busted. And so, yeah, he used it for like over a year throughout the campaign. And the first time I used it on an NPC, I TPK'd the group.
Mhm.
Uh, so
It was the final boss.
yeah, it was the final boss. I waited until the final boss because I was like, this spell is so busted that it's gonna be a
Mhm.
TPK, so it should
But
be
you
the
know
final
what?
boss.
TPK to that spell, like there was definitely a sense of like, all right, you know what? There were that was the if you've heard us talking about the campaign where our pieces were pretty messed up, there were multiple levels of we deserved this in hilarity going into that TPK.
That's right.
But
So these are all fundamental overarching principles
mhm,
for curation. We define what curation is. However, like I said before, there's a two-dimensional graph with curation. How much effort you put in and how much benefit you get in curation.
mhm,
Now, if you have the time and the energy to do piece by piece curation, then it is always better. But I mean, that's
but who
sometimes
has that? Yeah,
obvious. Nobody has the
yeah.
time to go and read everything that exists in the system. So I recommend, if you want, my overall recommendation before we go into the case by case
Mhm.
is to do what I'm going to call, I'm going to use a programming term, I'm going to define it, lazy evaluation of a case by case
Mhm.
that is based on some kind of a overall baseline.
So you might, for example, say, okay, in Pathfinder Second Edition, I'm going to allow people to pick all common options, and then if they want to take it
Or I'm starting a campaign, so
I'm
I can
starting
give an
campaign.
example that
Yeah.
that I used, right?
Hmm.
So the example I've used, I was just talking about my players today, is that it was very clear that like Black Tendril shot, and there were a few other things in Treasure Vault that did have comment on them, but they
Hmm.
could potentially have caused some issues. So I told everyone that asked me, I was like, anything common from the other rules line books, but Treasure Vault asked me even if it's common,
Hmm.
and ask me if it's uncommon or rare, and I'll usually say yes for ancestry options and those kind of thing. And because if they're related to the magic, the Magambia would want to admit students that are weird, rare ancestries that come to them because it would add to a diverse group of
Hmm.
students. And then we'll
So
look at it
yeah.
together. But so what lazy evaluation means in programming is that it's always smart to only evaluate something if you have to. And
Mhm.
if part of what you're evaluating, you already figure out what the answer is, you stop and don't waste any more effort than you actually have to.
Yeah, like for example, if you figured out that you don't want to include if you don't want to include an option because like for example, we were thinking like, oh, first like we probably shouldn't have the Shisk ancestry because like they're super about like keeping secrets and not sharing any information, and sharing information is a key part of this. But then there would be no need to go down and evaluate like other aspects
Yeah, all the shiz feats.
because
I
the
would have probably allowed it if someone was so enamored and was like, I want to play a very iconoclastic Shisk who got
yeah.
exiled for wanting to teach the secrets to everyone and trying to steal the secrets or something. I
Hmm.
would have been fine with that.
Yeah.
But we would have needed to have a discussion about Shisk because they really don't want to teach, and you have become a professor who teaches people
Hmm.
later in the adventure path.
Yeah. So that gets to sort of the one of the things you have there is that you have some general guidelines for people to think about, and then you don't have to go back and look through everything. It's kind of like the GM advice of like, don't go through and lovingly detail every building in the town because you don't know if the PCs are gonna leave the
Like
town
the
on
zero
session
with
one.
law of dungeon craft
Yeah.
is to not do too much work that you don't have to do.
Hmm. One of sort of the most straightforward curation methods that you'll see is these books yes, these books no.
So those kind of curation methods on our two-dimensional graph, their effort is low,
Hmm.
but their benefit is also much lower. You'll see curation like anything Paizo has ever written,
Hmm.
no matter what, but no third party, or just only this particular book, but no other books. Those will generally not get you as far, not nearly as far as doing something like having an overall baseline for something that you know you're going to allow, and then saying, "Come to me with anything else, and I'll do it
Hmm.
case by case." Assuming you have the mental energy to be willing to do a case by case analysis. The reason for that is just because people are mortal and not gods. So basically, just because it has my name on the cover of
Hmm.
something or a Paizo logo or even like Linda on an adventure, even though she knows adventures
Hmm.
for the
I've
Pathfinder system,
definitely
she's
made
done more of
mistakes.
them, but it can still have a mistake. So I'm not even saying the
I'm
mistake.
well familiar with the feeling of like seeing someone playing in one of my adventures and be like, oh gosh, I should have done that differently.
Now that I work for a third party, you might have been thinking of what I was saying.
Hmm.
All Paizo yes, all third party no. That the mistake I was saying was that you wouldn't allow third party. No,
Hmm.
the bigger mistake is all Paizo yes. uh, to be honest, or all anything yes, all
Hmm.
Mark Seifert on the cover yes. You shouldn't believe that everything is definitely fine for any
Hmm.
situation under any circumstances, unless you have to because of effort reasons. In which case, then you need to find something that is the thing that you trust the most and use that as a surrogate for being able to make the judgment call
Yeah.
situations. Like for me, I would say that if Mark Seifter worked on it, then I would probably trust it. But that's because
You
I
are
am Mark Seifter,
yeah.
so I'm not in the same situation.
Yeah, one of the curations that we
Even
did.
then, I don't trust
Yeah.
myself. I'd rather have backup from all like
Hmm.
me plus like a bunch of people at Paizo who are the best at checking specific things, and then some other people that I know who aren't at Paizo who are good at checking other things, and just have everyone check it, and
Mhm.
then I'd be safe with
Yeah,
it.
one of the curations that I'm most familiar with is the character options, or sometimes called additional resources for organized play, where it's like, okay, yeah, we're gonna have most things come through, but there are some options that we might say, okay, this option is great for a home GM, but when the GM is running this kind of adventure, then they may not have as much information or flexibility to make the changes for this, or like, this option seems like it might be kind of more of an evil character option, or like any of the number of other reasons that we might get into for
That's right.
why it might not be as fitting for that particular environment. So it doesn't even it can even be like the style of adventure, or the environment, or who's running it, or like whether it's a published adventure or not. It doesn't even have to be
Right.
like.
And Rico points out the same thing, that you could just use the org play lists
Hmm.
as a starting point. Absolutely. The play volunteers who go through and try to find things that could
Hmm.
potentially cause issues are outstanding. Even they're not going to catch everything that you might catch, especially
Hmm.
since they're doing it for org play and not your table. So they might be concerned about, I don't know,
Different things.
an ability that has ambiguous interpretations that you were like, no, I know how I would run
Yeah,
that.
but
But
it
it
was
would
just like,
cause a
yeah,
problem in org play, because
yeah,
if you sat down at Linda's table, she might not run it the same way.
and then that messes your
And then
expectations for things
the
like that. Yeah.
people who are doing that check for org play
Hmm.
have done so many org play adventures, they know when it's going
Hmm.
to cause friction between a player and GM who
Yeah.
have different interpretations. Whereas you might know that it definitely won't cause friction for you, but on the other hand, that your group is like known to abuse any kind of grapple options related to octopodes, and you don't know why, but they
They
always
just
do.
do that so that
No,
you want
like
to.
there's one
Yeah.
person who's on the org play team for a while, on not the
Hmm.
official team, but on the volunteers,
Yeah.
who knew that his table abused options that were sharing the same space
Hmm.
with multiple characters, and I always knew when I was at Paizo and I was not in organized play, but I was like the
Hmm.
design lead who interfaced, that one guy would catch anything that
Anything
was an
that was like
abuse
that,
with
yes.
going into the same space, because
Yes.
his local group abused every possible version of that. So
Hmm.
it made him an expert even beyond most of the people who worked at Paizo, for finding issues with
Yeah.
going into the same
So this
space.
is this is a more fine point type of curation that's more based on, like, you have seen with your particular group that this batch of options is just like, we don't want to use this batch of options. And you may also have things where your particular group is just like, we love these things. They're not like in the core rulebook or whatever. We want to just add these to our default all the time. If your group is like, you know what, we automatic bonus progression is our favorite. We're always going to use automatic bonus
Yep.
progression.
Or
Or
we
we're
love leshies, so now
Yeah,
they're free and you don't have to spend ACP for them.
yeah.
Totally not influenced by Linda in any way decision. I think it was just because people liked
No,
leshies. It was the most
I actually
popular.
didn't suggest that idea.
Linda is too lawful, so she would not do it because she would think it was too much pandering to
That's
herself.
correct.
However, she will support it when the data suggests it and
Yes.
other person brings it up.
If someone else brings it up and the data suggests it, I will support it, but I will not be the first one to vouch for it.
Too
Just
lawful.
like I wasn't the first one to vouch for Leshies and their increased prominence, but then other people who were vouching for it, then like the entire room suddenly turned to me to make a case for why Leshy should be included, and I'm like,
Yes,
here we go.
you became the spokesperson, but you weren't the one who actually called out for it. Um, Weirdly enough, it was actually started, not even it came from the design team, and not even from me, but
Hmm.
from some of the other, from like Logan and Steven Raddy
Hmm.
McFarland, who are not like the two
The
people
biggest
who like are
fans
the
of
biggest
cuddly and cute
yeah,
things.
they're not the biggest Leshy people overall, but they were just like, Mark, you're going to that meeting where they're
Hmm.
talking about it, say Leshy.
Hmm.
And Logan brought it up, and Steven nodded. And then when I went there, I was talking about it, and I could see that some of the upper people were like, "Are you sure, Leshy?"
Hmm.
And is that what the design team really said? I was like, "Yes." And they were having everyone vote, and some people were voting for their own teams. I was like, "I guess this vote should include Steven and Logan." Like, well, we're only going to count you for one, Mark, for some reason. And then
Hmm.
Steven happened to be walking past Steven Rodney McFarland, not Steven Glicker,
Hmm.
and he like mouthed like leshies, and he just pointed. He didn't even hear what we were saying. I was like,
Hmm.
see, okay, clearly they do want leshies. hilarious.
Yes.
So another example of an idea that Kitchev got to it, I was going to bring it up later, but I'll bring it up now because it's an important one. Is everything could be allowed, but possibly on a trial basis.
Yes.
So that is potentially good, but it has some pitfalls. So that's why I definitely wanted to bring it up during this episode.
Yeah.
So benefit is you don't have to be some kind of design god
Mhm.
who always knows when something's going to break for your table. So the detriment is anytime you have to take away someone's toys, it hurts a lot
Yeah.
more than if you just said no in the first place. So I would recommend, rather than everything yes on a trial basis, to do your best to
Mhm.
curate away things that
But then if
seem
you're
like they're
like,
obviously a
yeah.
problem, but still put everything on a trial basis anyway.
Yeah, so that if you're, and it's particularly like if you're on the fence about something and you're talking
Yes,
to the player and like I really want to try this out, and then you're like, I think this might be too powerful, but let's give it a shot for a while, and if it seems like it's not working, let's work out a way to switch this up a little bit so that it would
exactly.
work. And then you have the buy-in from the player in the beginning that you're going to work with them to find a way to adjust it. And then
You
if you do
tell them
that,
ahead
yeah.
of time, they become a collaborator with
Hmm.
you, and with the idea that you'll work on it together to get it to work. You're not just
Yes.
going to just completely take it away. They become part of the
Hmm.
co-design of it, and they
Yeah.
get invested in part of it that is not just is their character powerful or
Yeah.
not, or do they get their thing or
And you
not,
can talk
and
to
that's
them then
very,
after a
very
session
useful.
if you're like, yeah, how do you feel like that went that time? I feel like this happened, and then work it out from there for how you might adjust it.
Yes, and you can talk to the other players too, because that player might just be like, "Oh, it was totally great,"
Hmm.
and it was busting everything. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, so I hear you, but I talked to the other players, and they said that when we used that option that you wanted, and you did 9,000 damage to
Hmm.
all of the creatures in Pathfinder 2, where they had it most like this was level 1, so they had it most 20, that it was too much, and that we should probably not have allowed it. So maybe we should think of a way to not do 9,000 damage to all of the creatures. They might still be like, no, I think 9,000 was fine because it wasn't over 9,000. That'll be at level
Hmm.
2. And you may have some issues. It just does depend on the player. But a lot of cases, by bringing them in as part of the process, they become a collaborator with you who's working on it together. And if you can bring your whole group in, that's great. Our group does curation in that way where it's
Hmm.
kind of a group effort. The GM is the one who makes the final call for any given situation. And we will curate out some content that we all think is fine for the
Hmm.
game's overall health, but is not right for that campaign. And that's definitely for the
Yeah.
GM to do as
I
well.
want to also put in a first time chat here for someone talking about banning leshy characters. I mean, absolutely. Like, it makes sense to ban like what doesn't fit with your game and what doesn't fit with your theme. And I can absolutely see campaigns where they wouldn't work, or like just groups that are like, you know what, leshies feel goofy. I don't want that in my game. I can't tell my serious stories that I like, or whatever other reasons. So
Yes.
that's part of the benefit of having so much content out there, is that people can pick what they like and use it, and then they can pick what they don't like, and then it's like, I don't want to.
It's gone.
Yeah, I
It's
don't want
not
that in
in
my
there.
game.
Yep.
Everybody's gonna have some things like that are like part of the primary assumption that they just don't really like interacting with as much.
That's right. So, we talked here about some basic tips and principles for trying to not spend too much effort, but to get the benefits of a high effort curation
Hmm.
on your game. Just in general, any game curating, because nobody's perfect and no book is going to have all content that's right for your game. But what
Hmm.
if you're curating not just for like, oh, we're running a game and we don't want to get in something that's going to bust our game,
Hmm.
but you're curating for a very specific effect, like you want to run a game that has a different feel than a standard game, or that has a
Hmm.
different subgenre than a standard game. Many of the tips and techniques we described are going to work well for you here. By which I mean, tell your players what the feel and theme of the game is. Then tell them what your overall rule is that you're generally using to get to that theme. But then also say, like let's say for example you wanted a theme that was more horror. So you're
Hmm.
like, well, we're gonna, and I want it to feel more horror. We're gonna get rid of some of these
Hmm.
things that like remove diseases, and resurrection magic is not even just uncommon; it's even rarer than that. But also, if you see anything else that seems like we should remove it for a horror campaign, let me know.
Hmm.
And I might also remove other things if I see them as the GM.
Yeah.
I'll tell you in
Or
advance.
you may have something specific that you want to involve. Like maybe for the horror campaign, you want to have a theme where every character has had some brush with the supernatural, and then how they manifest that.
That's
One
right.
of them might be a witch, one of them might
Maybe
be.
everybody has an aftermath feat from Dark Archive, and you
Hmm.
curate it by adding that in as an extra benefit. I always find that to get your theme, also giving extra benefits as part of the theme makes players excited, and that's why things like the academia system in Strength of Thousands that I wrote for that AP are there. It's clearly a little bit of a power boost, but it really
Hmm.
helps make people feel invested to your theme, and it's
Also,
not
then
just
yeah,
about things that aren't allowed, but it's about things that you
because if
can
you
take.
tell people like you have to take or use this particular thing, then they might be like, "But I wanted to do this other thing." But if it's an extra thing that's on top, or an extra thing that's available, or if it's something that like then it feels, or if it's something that's really broad, like the you know character should have had some brush with the supernatural, can be in their story, can be manifest in a lot of different ways in a lot of different character classes and builds.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, this shows how the same tips that we use for general curation can apply here for genre curation, which is start with your concept for the curation. It is make an overall general rule, but
Hmm.
also use lazy evaluation to fill in specifics beyond that. It is bring in your players, get them invested, get them to become part of your team for doing this, so that it's not like a I am the
Hmm.
giant iron curtain that is holding everything else at bay, and my players are the hordes that are charging
Yes.
towards it that I am holding off. But it is no, we're all going to work together to tell this story and to get this kind of feel into
Hmm.
it, and you know what my priorities are. So if you see anything, say something. And if you don't notice it, I don't expect you to notice it faster
Hmm.
than I do. So I'll tell you if I see something you bring in that is also we think is missing this, and we'll figure it out from there.
Another thing you can take a look at, and this would be particularly valuable if you have a situation where, for example, you're playing with younger players who you don't, or players who are just like too many choices. This is overwhelming, or like or that sort of thing. You can start small and then build from there.
Yes. If you have younger players, or you just maybe you don't want to have to learn every
Yeah,
single
or
thing.
you're like, you know what? I want to run this game, but I don't want to have to like.
It's
I
like
just
I've
want to use
just
the core
started
rule book.
playing
I don't want
Pathfinder.
to use anything beyond that because like I just want. I want to. I don't want to have to like read and process all of these things. I already have like hundreds of pages. I just
Yes.
want to get going.
What you can do from there, what I suggest
Hmm.
is you could just do just the core rulebook to start off with. But let's say your players
Hmm.
are, you want to do that, your players are antsy, there's a few things that they like. So think about what your stomach is for learning things.
Hmm.
You've decided you didn't want to read every book out there that Paizo's
Hmm.
written, that every third party has written. So instead, what you could do is you say to your players, okay, beyond the core rulebook,
Hmm.
I want you, you can ask me for three uh, other curation things that are not in the core rulebook.
Hmm.
Now, the somewhat worse, the kind of mistake play to do here that a lot of
Hmm.
people do is like pick one book that's not the core rulebook.
Yeah.
You each pick one, but if you do that, then you wind up still if you have six players and they each pick a
Six
different
different
book,
book.
have to
Then
look
you
at six
yes,
books.
yes.
So if you just say no, it doesn't matter where they're from. They can be from anywhere.
Hmm.
Just give me three things to look at, and if
Hmm.
I say no to one of them, you can get a replacement until
Yeah.
you have three things. And that's for character creation stuff. If you have a wish list of items or spells or things that are
Hmm.
not those three things, that either they're like a rare spell or something that you'd like to encounter, or even a common one from a later book that in this hypothetical we're not allowing yet, that we're
Hmm.
treating as uncommon or rare because I don't want to read that much beyond the core, put together a wish list and
Hmm.
I will be happy to add those in as
Hmm.
treasures, and
Yeah.
I'll go through and look at them
And
while
the
I'm setting
important
up
thing about the
treasures. It
wish
takes
list
me
is yeah.
less time than figuring
Hmm.
out a treasure would
Yeah.
to do that curation.
And the important thing about the wish list type thing too is then that's not spending session time. So if you're a GM, if you're a newer GM or a GM who like doesn't feel as comfortable with like suddenly coming up with complex rulings on the spot, then you have that information to do on your own time, and to you can look it up and compare it to other things too.
That's right. Rico points out session zero stuff applies to curation too. You want everyone on the same page,
Hmm.
whether it's a tightly balanced tactical game, a gonzo monster game. or both at the same time.
Yeah, like as if the GM and the players are on a different page about what kind of
I
curation
think my
choices they
game
want to
that
do.
has the person playing the mimic vending machine is going to be a tightly balanced tactical game. There's also a Gonzo monster game,
Hmm.
most likely,
That's
but
true.
we'll see what happens. Absolutely. So yeah, I think that there are ways to do it, and that basically using the principles of lazy evaluation or just in time evaluation, where you evaluate things only when you have to, and putting a numerical limit as opposed to like a book limit or a,
Hmm.
if it was from Paizo limit, or like any other thing, or like Paizo rulebook line only, like
Hmm.
that's not as easy to do as just like a, if your players are the ones with
Hmm.
infinite energy and you're the one who just doesn't want to have to read
Yeah.
everything, just ask them for a certain number of
Yeah, and
things.
the reason that I've mentioned the core rulebook at the center of this is
Well,
because
you have to at
you
least
have
know
to
the
at
core
least
rule
know the
book.
core rulebook, and like that's a good starting baseline to be like, yes, like if you're deleting things out of the core rule common items out of the core rulebook, then you probably have like a
You
deeper
have a
plan.
reason for that.
You have a deeper plan and a reason that
It's
you're
not
doing
just
that.
that you didn't want to read things, or if
Yeah.
it is, that's actually really bad. If it's like, I'm not gonna call most styles of gameplay bad,
Hmm.
but it actually is bad gameplay if you have not even read all of the core rulebook. You're not going to
Hmm.
read all of the core rulebook, and in order to avoid it, you're just like, we're using the spells from A through D alphabetically
Hmm.
because I didn't get through E through Z, and we're nothing from E through Z exists. And the cleric's like, "What about heal? It's in my divine font." Nope.
Hmm.
Do I get a replacement spell? No.
Yeah, because even well,
No, it's from E through Z. It
to
doesn't exist.
to
Like
to
I'm
be
going to I'm going to actually come out, even though I usually equivocate and say that is bad. You should
Mhm,
just not be GMing if you're going
mhm,
to not even at least allow the baseline of what the game
mhm.
is in, or at least
Yeah.
learn it enough
Can
to
I give
know
a
what you're
less
removing.
parodical version of that
But a
can
lot
speak
of
more to the
spells
question?
are in A through D.
Yeah,
Like,
I understand that. But that can sort of speak to that though, what you were saying there. Like for example, if you decided that, oh yeah, I'm gonna remove like all divine magic from the game. I'm gonna remove all healing spells or things like that. You need to then get deeper into the thing to look at, okay, what function that
but by
category
the
of
time you
rules
removed
set into the
all of
system and
the
things like that.
all of the healing spells, you had to look at them to
Yeah,
figure out they were healing spells.
exactly. And so well what I'm
I
saying,
was
oh
trying to
excuse me.
figure out a way that someone could possibly not have even read everything yet, but removing it anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't done with my point though, because the idea is though, like whether you've read it or not though, if you're deleting out large sections, then understanding like what their function is and the
Of
ramifications are
course.
is important.
But I think it's
And
possible.
because the core rulebook has so much of that core architecture, that's where you really need to worry about
Sure.
those kinds of
But I think it's
deletions.
possible to remove something unilaterally like that in a way that is good
Hmm.
for the game and for the particular style and theme of play that you're trying to do, even if it is as drastic as removing all healing
Yeah, you
magic.
totally can. It's just
But
then
you
you
just
need to
have
be
to know
aware of what
what
does
you're
that
doing.
mean for your campaign
Yes, you
exactly.
shouldn't be doing it because I didn't want to read and learn the rules of healing magic, so therefore, having never read them before, I removed them.
Hmm.
That is the one thing not
I
to do with
really
the
don't
core
think
rulebook.
anyone's doing that though.
Sure, but that was what you were. You kind of brought it over to that when we were talking about. This is why you said at
Yeah,
least start with the core rulebook,
yeah, that makes sense.
and so like this was me going on the record and actually saying there is a type of thing that is a bad wrong GMing. It's
Yes, fair
very
enough.
rare.
It's
Probably no
difficult,
one in
yeah.
history has ever said that they were doing
Hmm.
that, and now someone on this video is gonna try to prove me wrong. And,
Oh yeah, that's how
but
it goes on the internet. But
oh boy.
hmm
Rico said there's an armor enchantment in 3.0 that gave always on haste that was too strong in 3.0, so just always ban haste in PF2.
yeah, generally removing like one spell isn't going to be
That's
as much an
probably gonna
issue.
be
Like
okay, even if
usually,
it is for a very bad reason, like
yeah,
that reason.
it's just usually like if the spell is designed to be a countermeasure to something else, then just being aware of like when Mark was talking about like removing the disease removal things. It's like okay, that's going to make diseases more dangerous, and what does that mean for the campaign? And that could be what you intended.
Yeah. Rico says people from other systems who have preconceptions are going to be the real world examples that are closest
Yeah. So if
to
they're
the
like
no E through Z.
every time that I see a mechanic that does this kind of thing, it's a problem. So
Yeah. Or if they were like Paladin with a dip into Warlock is too strong in 5e, so I'm banning the champion class without reading it.
Hmm.
Like, even then, just banning the champion cards without reading is probably much more okay than cutting out all the spells from E through Z without reading them.
Hmm.
Oh boy.
Yep.
And Rico is saying this based on random people who joined the subreddit of PF2E and posted their house rules without playing or reading the game. That is
Fair enough.
fair. That's totally fair. So you can curate because you're trying to curate for an overall game for gameplay reasons, and just generally trying to not allow in things that are actually going to break or warp the game.
Hmm.
You can curate because you're trying to get a general theme or subgenre into your game.
You can curate because you don't want to need to process reams and reams of information,
Exactly. Just
and you'd
because
rather
too
have
much
the game
stuff.
be and you'd rather have the game be lighter and simpler to run. You can curate because like you are running, yeah, because that's the case for some of your players, or you may have players for whom some content is inappropriate, whether that's because of their experiences or what they enjoy in games or their age or any number of other factors.
That's right. And so these are some of the main reasons to curate, but in almost all of the cases, except for when the people are their players are minors who
Hmm.
you just don't even want to see the things. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to have a situation where you're like, okay, kids, we don't want you to see anything about drugs and sex acts. So go through the books and look for any drugs and sex
Yeah, no,
acts feeds and tell me what they
obviously
are
not.
so
So
that we can remove them.
yes, obviously not. So then
Uh,
you'd be like, okay, well, here's the curated list, and you can work off of that. That is a case where you would want to potentially look for things like, okay, just from these books, so that you can pre-vet certain sources and things like that.
what would you do if you just knew that there was a drug in like a pretty major source? Or you thought the kids would use archives of Nethys that would just have everything?
I would probably try to steer them toward like getting them PDFs or other things like that, so they wouldn't have everything, or like give them another
What if
list.
like they wanted like to use Game Master Guide because they were trying to do something and that had
So, in
drugs in
my
it?
experience, when I've run for kids who are young, it's always been beginner box, so I didn't have to worry
Yeah,
about
I mean
that.
that's fair enough. So if the answer is just beginner box, then that is always a good answer
Hmm.
because it does not have drugs in there.
Yeah. So I would recommend that. That's an excellent way to do a more family friendly curation.
Also, at least at the very least, the Game Master Guide had like a big sidebar about
Hmm.
drug addiction and like getting addicted to drugs is really bad
Yes.
in Game Master Guide. Like, I don't think anyone would read those rules and think
This is
drugs are
promoting drug
glamorous.
use. Yeah.
Let's this is telling people doing drugs are good.
Yeah.
If anything, people would read it and be like, "Oh my gosh, drugs will mess you up."
Yeah. Exactly. All those fortitude saves, man.
Yeah,
All those
and
fortitude.
will saves
Yeah, will saves too.
against like a psychological dependence
Hmm.
from the addiction. So, yeah, those are the reasons you might want to curate content. So, always use our tips and principles from this episode, and you will be able to curate while putting in less effort, but still get a like professional level or close to professional level of curation in your campaigns. That is going to be just way better than if you just kind of uh, pick a
Hmm.
completely blanket rule
Yeah.
without looking at things on a case by case and just say, "Oh yeah, all
I
rule
want
books
to I want
apply
to bring
to,"
up another example here
but
too.
nothing
If you
else.
look at something that does curation, the players guides for adventure paths, you'll see them saying, they're not going to make a firm yes or no, but they will say things like, these classes are highly suitable, these whereas these options may not see as much play or things like that, because they're
Yes.
still leaving the decision in the hands of the GM. But that sort of style of, hey, this is going to be super thematic. This is maybe not as thematic as the GM, that sort of thing.
Usually, players' guides go a little far in trying to claim, well, maybe you could play this thing that's absolutely the worst possible
Yeah.
thing. So, usually, if they say maybe not, that really means heck no.
They,
But you have to
G-
be careful because some
Mhm.
of them just bizarrely put skills that you obviously want in
Mhm.
the category of like the worst for no adequately explored reason, such as the Outlaws of Alkenstar player's guide said medicine was in the worst category for
But
like
it's very
not
useful.
but it didn't like. I think it was because it didn't show up in the AP when you did a
Yeah.
search for how many extra checks were in the AP. But it's so useful to have in the party that
Mhm.
it was like not really true that you shouldn't take medicine.
Mhm.
But other than that, generally, if they're like, ah, maybe think about not doing that, that actually means like, oh no, like,
Mhm.
oh no,
Yeah.
in those player's guides, because they don't try to curate as heavily as possible.
Mhm.
But it is definitely the case that player's guides are a good example of curating. Also, player's guides and rarity are reasons that Pathfinder Second Edition is on your side for curating. I did say at the beginning we would talk about that. Some I've talked in the past about the, like whether or not the game system wants to be the cool chill parent and make the GM kind of be the strict one
Mhm.
running the family situation. Pathfinder 2e is willing to be like the kind of stricter parent so that the GM can be the cool one by giving these rarities so that there's at
Mhm.
least some framework that you can stand by other than like kind of implying that everyone can use everything that was ever published and it's the GM being nasty that even limits anything at
Yeah,
all.
like what our home group did, where we're basically like, okay, essentially we had a soft like core rule books generally common, and other books are generally
Yeah, our home group had this kind of rule in
yeah.
Pathfinder 1 as well, but we had to make it all on
We
our
had
own.
to we made it on our own, yeah, and we're like, and other books are like kind of uncommon, and then like if it's some like source that's farther out there, then maybe it's more rare, and then like that determines how difficult it is to find and what are the chances that it'll generate on a random generation table and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And so I think that rarity was one of the things that I was pushing for in PF2 because, like Linda said, our group used it all along,
Mm-hmm.
and I found it to be very useful as a tool, just even for the social contract of the table, even as much as it is for the campaign. And fortunately, also, like Logan was very in favor because he liked the idea of certain things that can
Mm-hmm.
complicate the plot not being considered to be automatically
Like
available, so that
teleport
they
and
like
chat,
teleport
yeah,
if you don't mention a plot so that you
or
don't
like mind reading and other things that are like investigatory
so
magic.
you don't have to be like why is nobody using this, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the people who wrote adventures also were like yeah this could be useful to us, so we always have to write weird plot explanations for
For why no one can do this, yeah.
why this isn't being used in the plot. So it
Mm-hmm.
fortunately caught on pretty well, but it is definitely something that was uphill a little bit with the fan base during the playtest because some of the playtesters didn't like it because they were players who were used to the give me all the candy style,
Mm-hmm.
and they got a sense that the existence of this would mean that they were not going to get a give me all the candy style of books in the future, and
Mm-hmm.
so it wasn't completely uphill. A lot of players did like it, and it wasn't as like negatively polled as like resonance in the
Yeah.
playtest, but it was definitely one that a small but vocal contingent of playtesters were very vociferously against because they wanted everything always, and it's one that bore out, that it made it in
Mm-hmm.
and it bore out, and people are now very happy about
Yeah, it
it
makes it a lot easier
because
to calibrate both like things that could affect the way that certain stories tell it. Lets you tell a lot more different kinds of stories, and also makes it easier to give regions and campaigns their own unique character.
exactly it starts the conversation about curation and the idea that you should,
Hmm.
because you know what, there were before that some schools of thought that you never should. There was an almost like toxic permissiveness that
Hmm.
was promulgated in some cases by like official sources and like very professional like
Yeah,
GM advice
but
columns
they're like
that would tell
anything that's
people
ever been
like
published
anything that's
anywhere.
ever been published you should allow, and if the players want to do a thing you should always allow it and never come up with countermeasures for it no matter how often they use it or
Hmm.
you're being adversarial. That was like too far in that direction
Yeah.
by a significant amount. To so much that strained credulity for it's like, how is this a living, breathing world if
Hmm.
nobody
How
ever
are you
comes
having? It's like yeah.
develops a counter for something that they know you're using and that counters exist?
Yes.
Like counter strategies exist, and that it would be normal to use them when you know that this is
Hmm.
what is going to
It's like
happen.
how is everyone not bored playing that game?
I don't know, but like it really was true. I would see in like advice columns where people would like write into Dragon magazine or something, and like professional game designers would answer the question and
Hmm.
be like, "No, you should just let your players do whatever they want." And it should be more of a conversation in the world with players and GM
Hmm.
where you're setting up a world that makes sense and
Hmm.
where things exist and are used. That's both measures and countermeasures.
Yes, and where people, and where the characters will encounter challenges and then have the satisfaction of overcoming them rather than just.
Yes. And besides which, people like getting cool special goodies as rewards
Hmm.
that they couldn't have gotten any other way. If you don't have rarity or curation of any kind, then everything was already available, so nothing is a reward unless you have to
Yeah.
make some custom thing. Which, are you a professional designer? Do you want to have to do that? Even if you do it,
Hmm.
you might be worried: is this as cool as the
Hmm.
things that the
Or they
professional
play, or
books
then
are
maybe
adding?
they want to use those options in future things, and then you just keep
Yep.
going on the treadmill of
You have to
having to
constantly
generate new
design
stuff.
new stuff, which you don't which takes a lot of time on its
Hmm.
own. So like it's cool to have curation because it has many different benefits for you. If you want to see more about this topic, watch our rarity episode, which is I think not on YouTube, but
Hmm.
it actually might be. It was a very old episode.
I can take a look.
So that is a very useful episode in general. So does anyone else have any questions about content curation or like dilemmas that showed up in your game about content creation that you'd like us to answer or help solve for you here on the show? If not, I got through I think all of the
Yeah.
subcategories I wanted to, and people in chat brought up some of them even in advance. Linda, you made some really good points about like I hadn't been thinking of about if the players are the ones who need the curation and not the GM, but that's a
Yeah.
very important one because it's absolutely true. Um, so if that is it, then let's say goodbye to YouTube and do our
Hmm.
outro with our Twitch friends. Bye,
Bye,
YouTube. See you
YouTube.
next time.